So how do we get from this to awesome musical flowing solos? So one of the major problems that most guitar players that start to improvise seem to have is how to make a scale sound musical. In today's episode, I want to find the missing link between the theory and the actual reality of playing awesome solos. I'm going to get right down to the bottom of this, and chances are that you're going to find a few golden nuggets in this YouTube tutorial. But why should you be even listening to me? My name is Ulrich Ellison. I'm a professional guitarist. I've been playing for 25 plus years professionally, touring the world, playing thousands of shows. So I just want to share my experiences from the bandstand with you, and also teaching hundreds of students in my Total Guitar Transformation Academy, where I show people how to improvise with freedom and expression. All right, so let's get going. I think one of the first problems that we run into here is even just like a mindset problem. Huh? Scales are not music. I want you to look at a scale like a skeleton that you study in biology. Yeah? So basically, here's a skeleton and here's a human being. Of course, every human being has a skeleton, but this doesn't mean that all we are skeletons, right? We got flesh, we got skin, we got muscles, but even deeper than that, we got emotions, we got complex systems going on in our bodies. And it's not so different with music. Music is a living organism. In order for us to get better at improvisation, we need to start understanding music better. And that doesn't only have to do with theory. So let's break down some of the puzzle pieces that we're gonna need to take the scale note material to musical, meaningful solos. And this is a gross simplification, but we gotta start somewhere, right? So what comes to mind? The first thing for me is phrasing. So you got to find ways to take those notes and shape it into musical statements. And how do we do that? How do we practice that? Well, here's one of the most powerful ways that I have found. You find yourself an A note drum. That's just the A as a root note. And you start out with just the pentatonic shape as you know it. Doesn't really have a lot of meaning, right? But what if we start sculpting those notes? We play. Now that's a whole different world already, right? So what's the difference here? So I was shaping and sculpting the notes with bends, with vibrato, and also with slides. And I was assigning those notes rhythmical values. Now that seems maybe too simple and too primitive to even talk about, But I want to challenge you. Have you ever thought about what you're actually doing when you play musical phrases? Write it down on a piece of paper and then take this drone, take away all the time pressure, and just focus on the quality of your phrasing for once. Are your bands really in tune? I know this is not a sexy topic, but you know, this is what you're gonna need to really start playing with musical expression, yeah? Where you don't have to worry about these mechanical things anymore. So for me, bending in tune and good vibrato is very much on the top of the list. And I could probably do a separate video just on that. But you know, the start of it all is to actually evaluate and see like, okay, what is your vibrato like? Or are your bendings in tune? Are there certain bendings you struggle on certain strings? You gotta know those things, yeah? So, phrasing, yeah? And then I was talking about rhythmical values. So, you know, in this free format here, we still can play very intuitively. We don't have to think about notes, really, yeah? It is very important that you have a core vocabulary that is almost like second nature. It's like ingrained into your nervous system. If someone wakes you up at 3 in the morning, then you can just fire off some licks that you feel good about, that you know, that are part of your musical DNA. I want to show you the difference between bad phrasing or not developed phrasing and developed phrasing, or you know, gutsy connected phrasing. And maybe you can find yourself in between the spectrum from A to B, and hopefully this can help you to get a little more intense and articulate with your phrasing. Here's the bad example. Okay, here's a good example. So what is really the difference here? Yeah? I talked already about the quality of your bends and vibrato. Of course, that's a factor here. But there's another factor, and that leads us to our next topic. And the next topic is right hand touch. Super important and not much talked about. Eh? I don't know if you could tell, but on that first example, I was just pretty much hitting all notes. Just at 100% strength, all the same, you know, all the same velocity and volume. And on the second example, I had a dynamic touch. I had articulation. What does articulation really mean? You know, I'm throwing around all these terms, right? So articulation, if you think of language, and I always like to think of language when talking about music, it really means that you put some soul into what you're saying, right? Instead of just talking like this, and then he went to the river and he blah, 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 you know, just very flat, you suddenly start to have punctuation in there in your sentences. You make little pauses and you have different accents in your language patterns. Yeah? So when I speak, did you see how I put little emphasis on the word speak? And I didn't just, and when I speak, then I'm gonna do this and blah, blah, blah. Yeah? So it's the same thing with guitar playing. I hope my examples are making sense here. So you want to be able to play certain accents, and it starts with imagining it that way. Yeah? Because if I think like, da 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 da, if I think of that phrase, I just think da 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 da, it's a very boring kind of phrase. Yeah. But if I'm thinking da 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 bow, and I kind of like imagine the punch on that note, then I'm also going to play it that way. So, do you hear how expressive that last note sounded? Because I was just imagining it that way. So maybe you just have to start out first with the scale and just do this exercise where you play each third note with an accent. Let's try this. So this is just a scale in. and you just go. To even give you a feel that you can play notes louder and softer. The next step would be is you play lines really soft, and then once in a while you decide to make an accent. Yeah? That could sound something like this. Does that make sense? So that's even for you and your right hand to even develop some control of even playing an accent. Yeah? Because if you've never done this, or if your hands are not used to this, then you're not just naturally gonna start doing this. Yeah? Right hand articulation. Yeah? But I think there's another important aspect of right hand articulation that's often forgotten or not being talked about, and that is your right hand muting technique. Yeah? Because if you listen to my first good example of the solo, you're gonna hear that I'm not playing all the notes open and long. Yeah, I'm not playing all the notes like this, but there are some notes that sound percussive and dry. Yeah? Can you hear that? So basically, you know, there's a constant closing and opening of the hand going on that allows me to shape my notes with the right hand. Yeah? I think most guitarists think of all their note shaping going on in the left hand, which is natural because, you know, the left hand is where we manipulate the pitch and we play with the left hand, right? But the right hand is the motor, and the right hand is really the articulation machine, at least in my mind. So how can we even start making that more aware, if you have never done that before? I would really recommend that you find some funky environment, like just a drum loop maybe, and you start to play on just 1, 2, or 3 notes, and all you really do is pay attention to your rhythm and your funkiness and your muting and opening of the hand, if that makes sense. Yeah? So I'm gonna just find a funky groove here for you real quick, and I'm gonna put it down in the description, and I want you to just groove and practice on that funky groove. All right, here we go. So this is at 105 beats per minute. I'm gonna stay in A minor, and I'm just gonna play some funky stuff with 1, 2, 3 notes. Here we go. So maybe you're already surprised how many variations are possible on just 1, 2, or 3 notes. And you know, if you never explored this, then this is definitely something that you want to have in your arsenal. Yeah, you want to have some rhythmic variation and some articulations of your right hand. This is like breathing new life into your playing. Yeah, and I think we guitarists, we often make the mistake that we are so concerned with which notes to play and which scales and which chords and all this analytical stuff that we tend to forget about on how things feel, or even bigger, how we play stuff instead of what we play. Huh? I think this should be the main point for you to start thinking about, to think of how you do stuff and not so much what you do. Because let's go back to the backing track from the beginning. You know, I would say like 97% of the notes that I played were in the pentatonic, in the A minor pentatonic. And while there are some playing situations where I would play maybe some other notes and play more chromatic notes and go a little bit outside of the key center, the truth is that, you know, as gigging guitar players or guys that go to jam sessions that play blues and rock, the notes are just a pentatonic scale. Like, you know, 85% of the time we just play the pentatonic scale. But how we play it, that is really up to us. Yeah. Now I want to turn you on to another approach here, just to give you another example of how you can start thinking differently about the same 5 notes. And I'm talking about the Hendrix chordal style. So what are we going to do with the Hendrix chordal style in this context, you might ask, if you already watched some of my other videos here. So the Hendrix chordal style is mainly a technique that ornaments and embellishes the major triad. So, you know, if I have like A major, then I would play, right? And these notes, they're actually the 5 notes of the pentatonic scale. Yeah, we got the 3 triad notes, and then we got the 2 ornamenting notes, the 6th and the 2nd, or the 9. That gives us the 5 notes of the A major pentatonic. So how do we make use of this on our A minor backing track? Well, it's actually pretty simple. Yeah? So we got A minor. So all we need is our relative major of A minor. What is that? C major. So we just play Hendrix chordal style in C major over the A minor groove, and we're just gonna see what happens. Are you ready? That was a little bit sloppy here, but I hope you heard what I was going for and that I was able to put in some chordal harmony even over this straight ahead A minor hard rock backing track, yeah, where you think that there's not much room for melodicism. Yeah? It works. So this Hendrix chordal style really works and just shows you that you can arrange those 5 notes in completely different ways that are not just scaly and, you know, playing a scale up and down. All right. So I hope you got a lot out of this episode here today. And I just want to encourage you to start getting organized in your guitar playing. And instead of just mindlessly noodling up and down and just playing the scale, I want you to sit down and actually think about all the possibilities that you have, that you can use over a backing track like this, and write them down on a list. Write down a shopping list for your improvisation, and write down some of the stuff that you know exists, but you haven't really worked much on it, and start working on these things very specifically. And if I were you, I would start with the right hand, really, because that's one of the key elements that can elevate your playing. Now, if you would like to have a full blueprint and a full roadmap of how to develop your guitar playing and fill in the missing gaps, then you shouldn't wait around longer, but schedule an evaluation with our TGT team, where we will take a look at your playing and help you to figure out what the heck is not happening in your playing and what you really need to be doing to rise up much faster than you could figure it out on your own. If that's you, then go down there in the description and click on the link that says Game Plan Evaluation. All right, and since you're still here, why don't you watch this video here next? Keep on rocking.